Hello everybody, my name is TitansBane and welcome to another top 10 list. Today, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 underrated games. These are games that I enjoyed that I felt were underappreciated, underrated, that nobody really talked about or played, and I just wanted to cast a little spotlight on them to bring them more attention. There will be spoilers for the games on this list, so just a heads up for anybody that might be interested in trying out or playing one of these games. There will be spoilers, so please keep that in mind. So without further ado, let us begin. Number 10. Spec Ops: The Line. So Spec Ops: The Line is a third-person military shooter that released during the PS3, Xbox 360 era. Unlike the shooters during that time, Spec Ops: The Line puts more of a focus on storytelling, characters, and the consequences of your actions. The story for Spec Ops: The Line is set in Dubai, where the city of Dubai went through a massive sandstorm that completely destroyed the city, buried it head to toe in sand. Buildings destroyed, collapsed, the whole 9 yards. Everything is gone. Barely any survivors at all. And so the plot follows your character. You play as Captain Walker, who, along with his two other companions in his squad, are investigating a mysterious transmission from a Colonel Conrad, who was a very respected military war hero who, while coming back from Afghanistan with his team, ended up being stuck in Dubai and tried to help with the relief efforts, but ultimately he just went MIA. Nobody knows what happened to him. Many assumed he was dead, because of the giant sandstorm that happened in Dubai, so nobody know what happened to him. But until just recently, when a mysterious signal transmission came out from Colonel Conrad saying, "Hey, I'm still here. I need help. I need reinforcements." And so your character Walker and his squad go to Dubai to investigate, see what's going on, and to uncover the mystery of what happened to Colonel Conrad and his men. So you go to Dubai. Walker and his group go to Dubai. Their original mission was just to, investigate, see what's going on just for a little bit, and then leave. Come back and report it. That was it. But Walker, he decides to go further. He wants to really know what the truth of what happened to Conrad and his men, because as you explore Dubai, you find out that because you encounter many armed soldiers throughout the game, and you find out that these armed soldiers are part of Conrad's team. And so the whole game, the whole mystery is, why is Conrad's men doing all these atrocities, like trying to kill you, as well as all these other things that are going around the city that are just very, very terrible. Like innocent civilians being killed, bodies hung up and strung around, stuff like that. The whole mystery is trying to figure out, where's Conrad? Why is his men doing this? Is he the one giving the orders? Is somebody else giving the orders? What's going on? And so Walker wants to get to the bottom of it, despite the fact that his two companions are constantly telling him, "No, let's get out of here. We had our orders. I don't know why we're still doing this, but we gotta follow you because you're a captain." So, yeah. And as I mentioned, this is a third-person military shooter, so of course you got your usual, cover style shooting gameplay from games back then, like Years of War, where you just hide and cover, peek out, shoot the enemy, blah blah blah, stuff like that. But what makes this game more unique and more interesting is the story and the characters. Walker himself is a very fascinating character in the fact that he's a guy who doesn't seem to really have any regard to the orders that he's given, and he seems to really be gung-ho about wanting to find out what happened to Conrad, despite not really having a personal connection to him. He just seems like the kind of guy that just wants the glory and the attention, and that's what it seems like at first. Because why else would he be doing this? Like you could argue that he's just trying to do the right thing. He's just trying to get to the bottom of it, and others can argue like, he's just trying to be an attention-seeking guy because he has no reason to keep going. He should have just followed orders. So you get to really delve deep to these characters, both Walker and his two squad mates, as well as the psychological aspect, because Spec Ops: The Line is very can sometimes delve into psychological horror sometimes, where certain moments in the game you can't really, because of as you progress, Walker's psyche slowly dwindles. So you can never really tell sometimes if things are happening for real or if it's just in his mind. And as I mentioned also, this game heavily is about the consequences of your actions. One perfect example is a very infamous scene, which is the white phosphorus scene, where you and your team are going around killing enemy soldiers using a device that shoots out white phosphorus against the enemy. And white phosphorus is is basically like basically a fire grenade, I guess you can say. But you know, just way hotter, way hotter. You know, your skin just scorches and burns and all that crap. And what made that scene infamous is that, you know, you're fighting, you're doing this against the enemies, despite the fact that it might kind of be morally wrong, which is another thing about this game, is that there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray. There's very rarely ever any real black and white. 99% of this game is morally gray. And you find out later that there's a large group of people huddled near a door. You don't know you think that they're the enemies. So you fire the white phosphorus, you go down there, you find out that you just scorched and killed a bunch of innocent civilians. And Walker and his team are traumatized by that, and each of them deals with it in a different way. And that's what I like the most about this game, is just seeing how these characters react to these kind of situations. So, like I said, the storytelling, the characters, and the consequences of what you do in this game are the primary focus. And it's just very interesting to see the kind of stuff that goes on in this game. So Spec Ops: The Line definitely is a game that really needs to be played by more people. Number 9, Sleeping Dogs. Now, Sleeping Dogs is another unfortunately underrated game that really needed more attention. So Sleeping Dogs originally was going to be True Crime Hong Kong. It was going to be the third game in the really old True Crime series, which was True Crime Streets of LA and True Crime New York City. And True Crime Hong Kong was supposed to be the third game set in Hong Kong. But eventually, stuff happened behind the scenes. I don't really know much about that, but stuff happened behind the scenes, and eventually True Crime Hong Kong eventually became its own thing and turned into Sleeping Dogs, which on the surface looks like a Hong Kong, Chinese version of Grand Theft Auto, but it's a lot more than that, because the story of the game is that you play as Wei Shen, who is an undercover cop trying to investigate the triads. And throughout the whole game, you are doing things for the triads that Wei Shen is not really comfortable with, but he knows he has to do it because when he grew up with the triads, he grew up with that kind of stuff, so he's the best man for it. So you're constantly doing things that will make you uncomfortable, helping the triads, while trying to maintain your cover so that they don't figure out that you're a cop. And what makes Sleeping Dogs unique is just the way that the Chinese culture is represented in Hong Kong. The game has a huge emphasis on hand-to-hand combat as well as melee combat. There are guns in Sleeping Dogs, but they're not a primary focus. You don't really keep an arsenal of guns like Grand Theft Auto. You don't just have an arsenal of guns to just pull out and start shooting people with. A lot of the game is focused on the melee and hand-to-hand combat, which, since it's Hong Kong, is very martial arts influenced. So you get to do all these kind of different martial arts moves, all these different styles, which are cool. There's even a whole DLC that's basically a tournament on an island, and you're just doing a martial arts tournament, and that's really cool. Story, the characters, everything about Sleeping Dogs was great. Just driving around Hong Kong was really cool. And it's just a shame that this game ended up being such a underrated sleeper hit. Well, not a sleeper hit, but just an underrated game that really needed more attention. There is According to more recent news, the actor Simu Liu, who many of you might know from the movie Shang-Chi from Marvel, he is trying to get a Sleeping Dogs movie made, and I really, really hope that does happen because Sleeping Dogs deserves more attention, and hopefully it will be enough to get Sleeping Dogs 2 because a sequel for this game really, really needed to happen. It really needs to happen. So, Sleeping Dogs, another great game. More people should definitely play it. Number 8, Jenny LeClue. Now, this is a little indie game that I really enjoyed called Jenny LeClue. It's about a girl, a little girl. Well, I would say like more in the early teens, maybe like 14, 13 range. I don't exactly remember how old she's supposed to be. I haven't played the game in quite a while, so some details I'm not very remembering about. But Jenny is basically a child prodigy. She's a genius as well as a detective genius, a detective prodigy. Her mother is, I believe, her mother is was a detective as well, or something along those lines. Again, I haven't played this game in quite a while, so some details I might be wrong about. What makes the game also interesting is the fact that the game is also kind of a fourth wall kind of breaking kind of thing because of the fact that the character Jenny LeClue is actually a storybook character in the game world. So in the game, the very beginning opens with the author of Jenny LeClue trying to create the newest book for the franchise, and he's conflicted about wanting to make a new story that his publisher and fans want, which is a more darker, more serious story, versus what he wants, which is the usual kid-friendly, family-friendly kind of thing. So he decides to cave and does the more darker story. And so Jenny LeClue, the game. So basically, the story of the game is that Jenny's mom works for a very prestigious university in the town that her and Jenny live in, and the dean of the university gets murdered, and Jenny's mom ends up being accused as the murderer. So the whole game is basically you playing as Jenny, talking to all the characters that live in the town, investigating all over, collecting clues, evidence, to find out who killed the dean, and to clear your mom's name, and figure out what the hell is going on. And despite the seriousness of the murder, the game never really tries to be like, like something that is super, dark and super serious. The game is very lighthearted. The game is very funny, very, like, God, kind of like a childlike kind of thing. Because again, when you look at the fact that the game itself is like a book that an author is writing for, young kids, young adults, stuff like that, like like Nancy Drew or stuff like that. It makes sense why that, despite such a serious thing as murder, why there's such a lighthearted tone, because this is ultimately the game. In universe, the game is a book written by an author trying to make a story for young adults and kids. And the game, like I said, the game is very humorous, very lighthearted. The characters are funny. The way that Jenny interacts with these characters is funny, because Jenny herself is kind of arrogant and kind of a know-it-all, thinking that she knows better than everybody else just because she's really smart than everybody else. So she ends up kind of like not really to people's faces. Well, sometimes, depending on the character, but she always kind of like talks crap about them, especially for characters that she doesn't like. She does not try to hide that she doesn't like a particular character, even if they're nice to them. Like, she very rarely, I think she only has like one friend in the entire game, and everybody else that she tries to be friendly with, or she just straight up just does not like. And so being a detective kind of game, of course there are puzzles, but the puzzles are simple, puzzles are easy, nothing that's going to be like, oh, I need to look up a whole guide to figure out what's going on. Puzzles are very easy and straightforward. The game itself is kind of like a side-scroller kind of thing. You walk left and right to different areas. Sometimes you can go like up and down to enter buildings and stuff like that, but for the most part, it is a side-scroller game. And I do think it is a very good game, and I believe that they're working on a sequel. I'm not entirely sure if they're still working on it or if that got put on hold, because this game is quite a few years old, and I don't think I've seen any updates about it. I haven't really checked, but I really do hope that the game ends up getting a sequel, a part 2, because the ending really sets up sequel material. So, Jenny LeClue, fantastic game, fantastic little indie game, and deserves to be played. Number 7, Titanfall 2. Now this one kind of hurts because Titanfall 2 was a great game, is a fantastic game, one of the best games that Respawn has made, and yet there will never be a Titanfall 3 because they are too focused on fucking Apex Legends. Whether it's by their choice or EA's choice, I don't know, but I want a goddamn Titanfall 3. If you played Titanfall 2, you know how great the game is. The way that the movement, the way how you could wall run, all the fucking movement abilities. Basically, if you played Apex Legends, it's pretty much exactly like Titanfall 2, except that you can wall run. So, you know, a lot of the weapons are there, the same movement, being able to, you know, slide, and everything that you can do in Apex Legends, you can do in Titanfall 2. And it's just in the game's campaign is great. The character being able to interact with your Titan mech. I can't remember the name of the Titan mech for the life of me. I'm sorry. It's been quite a long time since I played this game, but your character, I believe his name was Cooper. Your character Cooper and his Titan mech, they constantly interact and talk with each other, and it really forms like a strong brotherly, like a strong friendship with each other, and you really feel for the Titan mech. You're looking at this giant hunk of metal, this giant robot, and you don't expect to be able to really care or connect with it, but the Titan mech really does, and ends up being like your best friend for the whole game, with the way he constantly with the way he interacts with Cooper, and you know, everything else about the game. Like the gunplay is great, the gameplay, you know, is great. The way you move around the different levels and maps is real cool. The boss battles are fun. There was only like one boss battle that I kind of had a little trouble with. I think I forgot the guy's name. It was like a flying boss. I know that he's like I think he's like the father, one of like the chick in Apex Legends that can fly. Can't remember her name, but I think he's like her dad or something. And I just remember having a bit of trouble with him. But other than that, all the boss fights were real fun. Everything about the game was great. And I really would like a Titanfall 3 Respawn, please. Like, everybody wants it. Everybody that has played Titanfall 2 wants Titanfall 3. You can put Apex aside for like a little bit. Like, put some kind of team together for Titanfall 3, because it really needs to happen. So yeah, Titanfall 2 really deserves to be played more by people, because not a lot of people ended up playing it. So, and it's a shame. Number 6, Mirror's Edge. Now, Mirror's Edge is very, very dear to me, because it was the kind of game that was, you didn't really see this kind of, like a game like Mirror's Edge. A first-person parkour game. Like, the whole thing about Mirror's Edge, what made it so unique from other FPS games, was that the entire game was heavily focused on parkour, climbing up buildings, climbing up pipes to jump off, wall running, jumping off one side of a building to get to another, more higher up ledge, you know, stuff like that. The game didn't have, like, the game didn't have like a big focus on combat. Like, there was combat, like you had your melee, you had your hand-to-hand combat, and you did have guns, but guns were more like last resort kind of thing. Well, not really last resort, but it was like you picked up a gun, you used it, and then you threw it away, because guns would slow you down. Because the whole thing, like I mentioned, the whole thing about Mirror's Edge is the parkour. You want to be fast, you want to keep constantly moving, because that's the whole point of the game, is to keep constantly moving and to be fast, to avoid your enemies, or to be able to get to the other side of a long jump. You want to build up that momentum, and the guns will slow you down, so you throw them away when you're done using them after combat. because also the fact that when you run out of bullets in the gun, that's it. You only have whatever's in the magazine, and then you just throw it out. So that's what made Mirror's Edge unique, is that it didn't rely or didn't focus on gunplay or the combat to be good. It was the parkour that made it so great. And they did eventually make a sequel. There was Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I enjoyed Catalyst for what it was. I thought the open world could have been better for Catalyst. Thought it could have been better. And ultimately, while I did like Catalyst, Mirror's Edge, the first Mirror's Edge, is just, just a much more better game in both the gameplay, the characters, and the story. Faith is an iconic character, and it's just a shame that this is one franchise that EA kind of really just abandoned. Like, they tried with Catalyst, but again, just like the first game, not a lot of people bought it, not a lot of people played it, and EA just, as far as we know, they just finally just decided to put it to pasture forever. As much as I would love a third Mirror's Edge, I don't think it will happen, but but Mirror's Edge 1 at the very least deserves to be played by a lot of people. It's a really good game. It's a lot of fun, and I just highly recommend it. Number 5, Dot Hack. So I say Dot Hack, but I mean more specifically the original 4 Dot Hack games, as well as the Dot Hack GU games. So both the original 4 games, as well as GU for Dot Hack, hold very special places in my heart. They were very unique RPGs at the time when they came out, because they tried to simulate the look and feel of an MMO while still being an offline single player game. And Dot Hack, from the games, well, at least for those that know, Dot Hack from the games spawned multiple anime shows, Dot Hack Sign, Dot Hack Legend of the Twilight Bracelet, and Dot Hack Roots, as well as a few other movies, and stuff like that. Like, Dot Hack is just a really big multimedia franchise with, like I said, games, movies, anime, manga, and stuff like that. But the games themselves are extremely underrated. Like, Dot Hack itself is already, like, extremely underrated. Like, Cyber Connect, like, as much as I would love more Dot Hack, the franchise just isn't popular enough to really make Bandai Namco like care about it as much as it pains me to say. But the original 4 Dot Hacks, I remember really enjoying, and I just loved the world of the world, because that's what the game, like, the game in the game. So you got the game Dot Hack, and then you got the MMO game that the character that you're playing as is playing, called The World. It's very confusing. It's very confusing the way I say it. But it was very unique, because you had like your little your character's little desktop, and you could read your email, you could look at the news, forums, stuff like that, and then you logged into The World, the game, The World, and then that's where the real main game was. And you can have like up to 2 other party members. You go to the teleport gate, input the keywords to go to the field or a dungeon, and you run around, you fight monsters, you do the dungeon, get the treasure at the end, and rinse and repeat. And then you got the great story, great characters. So the story of the original 4 Dot Hack games is that you play as a guy named Kite. His friend Orca gets put into a coma by a giant monster that is not supposed to be there, and friend goes into a coma. Kite's like, what's going on? Why is my friend in a coma from playing a fucking MMO? So he goes to investigate, meets this ghost girl named Aura, gives him a book. The book turns into a bracelet called Twilight Bracelet, and the bracelet allows Kite to basically hack the game's files and code against monsters. So you'll be fighting a you could be fighting a level 50 monster, and you use a move called Data Drain, and the level 50 monster turns into a level 1 little piece of shit that you can just one-shot. And the Data Drain mechanic was really cool. It was really cool, although you did have to make sure not to overuse it, because you could end up getting a game over from data draining too much because of corruption. But it was a really cool mechanic. Admittedly, the original games have not aged well. The gameplay is very dated. It is not the best for even for its time. I think it was not really the greatest, but I still enjoyed it because it was still fun just interacting with the characters and the story, even if the gameplay wasn't like the best. However, all that got fixed with GU in the GU games. So the GU games are pretty much the sequel series to the original 4 games, where it takes place after the original 4 games, and you're still in the game The World, but it's now The World R2, which stands for Revision 2. And in GU, you play as a guy named Haseo, and his whole thing is that he's trying to find this player killer, or PK, that killed the character of his girlfriend named Shino, who ended up going just like the original games, she ended up going into a coma after getting killed, and Haseo is trying to find this player killer named Tri-Edge to get revenge, thinking that, hey, if he defeats Tri-Edge, maybe Shino will wake up from the coma. And a lot of stuff happens. Really too much to go through, but more or less, it's kind of the same thing. As the premise is kind of the same thing as the original 4 dot hacks, but GU still has its own twists and turns, and still does enough to keep it fresh and interesting and engaging for you. And the gameplay is heavily improved. It is a much more faster pace, more action kind of style gameplay, instead of the original game, where it was much more slower paced and you were just like going through menus a lot for the majority of the combat. But the GU games heavily improved upon every single thing that the original games did. And recently, a few years back, there was a remaster for the GU games for Switch, PS4, and PC. I believe it was also on PC. And I do wish that the original 4 would get a remaster, because it's very hard, very difficult to find any copies of the original 4 games, and any copies you do find are expensive as fuck. So I would love a remaster of the original 4 dot hacks, but again, it's just not a very popular series. It's very niche. And CyberConnect 2 and Bandai Namco, I don't think that the franchise is probably worth it anymore, as sad as it is. But at the very least, I would recommend you guys to check out the Dot Hack GU remaster, which is called Dot Hack GU Last Recode, I believe. I don't remember if they added the GU or if it was just Dot Hack Last Recode, but anyways, that's the remaster of the GU games, and I still heavily recommend trying that out, because the games are very good, very interesting story, very great characters, very funny characters, a lot of serious moments that make you get feels, and again, the gameplay is just great. So yeah, Dot Hack games, definitely a great time. Number 4, Signalis. Signalis. Yeah, so this is a retro style kind of a horror game. The gameplay is very much like the old Resident Evil, Silent Hill games from the PS1. You know, where you had your camera that would, shift perspective depending on the room, and then you had your tank controls. And Signalis is a very disturbing, but a very good game. Like, it is very much a psychological horror / body horror kind of game. So the story of Signalis is that you play as an android named Elster, who wakes up on a ship that has crash landed on a mysterious planet, and your mission is to try to find a missing girl that you don't know her name, you don't know nothing about her, you just know that you just have a photograph of her, and you are trying to find her. That's all you know, and you're just going on from there. And eventually you find this facility on the planet where the pretty much the whole game takes place on, is this facility filled with other androids that have become heavily mutated and modified by a strange kind of infection or a strange virus that turns them into these very grotesque looking body horror type android creatures. And the whole time you're investigating this facility, trying to figure out what the hell happened here, while also trying to find the girl in the photograph, trying to find out if she's either alive, dead, you don't know what, just trying to find her. And along the way, you meet a handful of survivors, and the characters in this game are great. Music in this game is very haunting, very creepy, but still really good. And the gameplay, like I said, despite the despite the gameplay being that old school style Resident Evil kind of thing, the gameplay still is very, very solid. I believe there is a option to have the game act more like the original tank controls, and to have a more smoother modern experience, kind of like the more recent HD remaster of the Resident Evil 1, of the Resident Evil 1 remake and Resident Evil 0, where you had your option to have the original tank controls, or the option to make the controls a bit more smoother and more easier to handle. I believe Signalis does something similar to that as well. But yeah, Signalis it's definitely one of the best indie horror games I've ever played. Definitely recommend everybody to check it out. It is a very, very solid game. And yeah, Signalis, check it out. Number 3, Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods, yeah. This is definitely one of my favorite indie games. So for those of you that don't know about Night of the Woods, it is a more of a story focus, kind of a slice of life, kind of style game. Uh, you play as a anthropomorphic cat girl, because all the characters in the game are animals. So yeah, anthropomorphic. I always anthropomorphic. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, so all the characters are basically animals that walk and talk and wear human clothes. Bad. So yeah, so you play as a character. You play as a character named May. She comes back to her hometown after finishing college. And from there, like, May is just pretty much kind of like a slacker kind of character. She doesn't really plan ahead for her future. Doesn't know what she wants in life. She really just wants to laze around and hang around with her friends, and just doesn't really have much to do involving her life. So a lot of the game is it's also kind of like I guess like a coming of age kind of story as well. So a lot of the game is you exploring the town, talking to everybody in the town, and then you have your choice of hanging out with your friends. You have two main friends that you hang out with. One is Greg, who is like this fox kind of guy wearing a leather jacket who wiggles his arms around. He's like, "Hey, let's do crimes, man. Let's do crimes." So you got Greg, and then you got another friend whose name I cannot remember. I cannot remember her name, even though I hung out with her the most, and that pisses me off. I can't remember her name, but she's like an alligator girl. I can't remember her name, but she's an alligator girl, and you hang out with her, and like she was like your best, and like the story is like she was May's best friend, but they kind of had a falling out, so they kind of like not really like each other that much, but over the course of the game it changes and they do become more friendly again. But yeah, a lot of the game is basically a lot of just talking to characters, hanging out with your friends, just exploring the town, having a good time. Like I said, like a slice of life, coming of age kind of thing. There is like a bit more of a deeper thing that happens very, very later on in the game, where there is like a kind of like a mystery, but uh that doesn't really get rolling until like towards the end of the halfway point of the game. And I kind of do wish that the mystery thing was like had more. I really wanted more. It's like, especially the ending. Like when I saw like that ending of Night in the Woods just made me want more of whatever the fuck happened in that time, that moment. Really wanted more of that. The game kind of ends in a way where it's like okay, like it's kind of satisfying, but I still wanted more. I still want to know what the heck happened, what was going on there. So it's a very interesting game, very interesting story that really does that really does have like lots of oh shit moments towards the end, and I really wish they kept that going for a little bit longer. But overall, Night in the Woods still a solid game. Very very enjoyable little adventure, and I recommend everybody to try it out. Number 2, Oxenfree. So Oxenfree is kind of similar to Night in the Woods, in where a lot of the game is, walking and talking, but the story and the characters really, really just pull you in, that you just don't care that the whole game is just walking and talking. Uh, so the story of Oxenfree is that you play as a girl, a teenager named Alex. Yes, Alex, I believe. Yeah, Alex was her name. Yeah, Alex is her name. Along with her best friend and her stepbrother, you're on this little boat, little ferry, going to an island called Edward's Island, I believe. Haven't played this game in quite a while, so I don't remember a lot of the names of stuff. But I believe the name of the island is Edward Island, or Edward's Island. You go there because in order to meet up with some other of your friends as like a celebration party thing, because I believe it's your character's last year before they graduate high school and go on to college. So you go to Edwards Island and you meet up with your friends, have a good time, drink booze and talk to shit on campfire on the beach, and then one of your friends, along with your stepbrother, you go to a cave, and your friend is like, "Hey, this is the cave. Did you bring the thing?" And then your stepbrother is like, "What are you guys talking about?" And then it turns out that Alex brought along a little portable radio, because this particular cave apparently has a thing where if you use a portable radio inside the cave, you can talk to the spirits of the dead. As the backstory of the story of Edwards Island is that there was this, I believe it was like a giant ship that had crashed into the rocks or something of Edwards Island, and all of the sailors ended up dying. And the legend is that their ghosts are still alive, haunting the the island. So you use the portable radio, a giant like triangle like appears inside the cave, and you end up unleashing the ghosts of Edwards Island. And there's like a lot of time travel too, like a lot of weird ghost time travel kind of thing. It's very hard to explain without you guys like playing or seeing the game, but that it's a lot of that. And you use the portable radio uh to do things like going back and forth through time, or opening rifts and talking to ghosts and hearing the ghosts talk to you and stuff. And it's very freaky, very weird. But the game still, like, it has its dark moments, but it still tries to be a little bit of a lighthearted kind of experience. And just like Night in the Woods, the characters are great. You get to choose, you can choose your dialogue options, and you can choose to either, be kind, be mean, be sassy, or just not say anything at all. Kind of like similar like a Telltale game. And then you can build relationships with your friends and your stepbrother. They can like you by the end of the game. They can hate you. They can be neutral. Stuff like that. And it was just a very fun time exploring Edwards Island, beginning to explore the island, find the little notes that detail more of the background, the backstory of what happened on that island, because there's a lot of crazy shit that went down there. And overall, Oxenfree was a very, very fun game, very great time, and definitely worth checking out. And now it's time for my honorable mentions. I have 3 games on my honorable mentions list. These are games that, while they didn't make the cut for the top 10 list, they are still very much games that I consider underrated that deserve to still have attention brought to them. So the first game on my honorable mentions is Crosscode. Crosscode is a retro-inspired 2D action RPG game, uh, where you play as a character named Leah, who is a player for an MMORPG game called Crossworlds. Leia is a character who has amnesia. She has no idea who she is. She has no memory of who she is, why she lost her memory. She's also mute. She cannot speak. So the whole game is you exploring the world of Crossworlds, trying to figure out why Leah ended up losing her memory, why she's mute, and along the way you uncover a much more deeper mystery in the world of Crossworlds. Crosscodes is a very, very fun game. It's a very, very complex game as well, because the game also has a large focus on puzzles for its dungeons. And admittedly, the main reason why Crosscode is on my honorable mentions list is because of the fact that I haven't finished it. I have not beaten the game. I have tried many times to beat this game, but eventually I get to a point where I kind of just stop. And it's a shame because, like, Crosscode is still a very, very good game. It has great characters, great story, and like from what I've played so far, and the gameplay itself is very, very fun. Like the combat is very, very fun. Like I said, it's an action RPG, but the combat is still very, very fun. It's kind of more so the puzzles are what kind of like drags it down for me, because the puzzles are unique. They're very, like, challenging, but there's sometimes it can be a little too much, and a lot of the time I just ended up having to constantly be looking at videos, constantly looking at guides to get through one dungeon, because the puzzles will get to a point where I just could not keep going. And I guess it's just that the puzzles just and especially when, from what I read, like later on, like the game, like the puzzles do get like harder and harder as you progress. So I guess that's like the one main downside for Crosscode, is just the puzzles. Just for me personally, I'm sure for other people, puzzles are super easy that they can figure out, but just for me personally, as someone that's not really a fan of puzzle games or, puzzle stuff, I just felt that the puzzles kind of just dragged down the experience for me. But everything else about Crosscode is still definitely great. Definitely still a game worth checking out. And it does, at least at the very least, does deserve an honorable mention. Now, my second honorable mention is Code Vein. Now, Code Vein is a Souls-like game made by the same people who makes the God Eater games. And Code Vein, for a lot of people, they look at it and they just think it's anime Souls. Uh, and while some of that is true, like, yes, it's a very anime. It's got an anime art style. It's very anime. It is a Souls game, so yeah, it's anime Souls. But Code Vein has a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more to the game. You have like a bunch of unique mechanics in Code Vein, like instead of like the usual leveling up your stats like you would do in Dark Souls. Uh, you have you have these things called blood code, which affects your character's stats and affects what kind of weapons and equipment you can use. You'll have a blood code that's like much more uh built for strength, so you'll be able to carry and use like heavy great swords and stuff like that. Or you might use a blood code that uses more agility based stuff, so you can use like more like bayonets and rifles and stuff like that, and long swords, but you won't be able to use any of the really heavy great swords because you don't have the strength requirement. And unlike um like Dark Souls, stuff like Dark Souls, where a lot of the story is told through the environment. Code Vein still has that kind of environmental storytelling, but uh, Code Vein does have a lot more cutscenes and a lot more of a character and story focus through for the cutscenes. So the story is a bit more easier to follow than it is for a regular Souls game, and it is definitely a one of the most underrated Souls-like games. Uh, and I do wish a sequel for it would happen, but I don't know if the game ever really did well enough. Like, it's still a great game, but I just don't think it did well enough that Bandai Namco would, similar to Not Hack, don't know if they would consider a sequel, as it is still very much an underappreciated, underrated game. But Code Vein is definitely a Souls-like worth checking out. It's also one of the more easier Souls-likes or Souls games in my opinion. So if you're someone that wants to get into the Souls like games, but are not really a fan of, like, the really hardcore difficulty that a lot of Souls games have, definitely I would say try out Code Vein, as it's much more easier than the average Souls game. So yeah, Code Vein worth checking out. And now the final game on my honorable mentions list is Phenotopia Awakening. Now this is a very interesting game because Phenotopia started off as a Flash game. I remember playing the original Flash game many years ago when I was a kid, on Newgrounds, and I very much enjoyed it. I very much liked what I played of it, and so when I found out that it was pretty much getting like a sort of remaster kind of thing for consoles and PC, I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. I can't wait for this. And for the most part, Phenotopia Awakening is basically just like the original Flash game, but much more heavily expanded and improved upon. And it really is a fun experience. It's like it's like it's also kind of like an action RPG kind of thing, but it's also a side scroller as well. And it's all like and just like Crosscode, it's also like very retro pixel art style inspired. And so the story of Phenotopia is that you play as a girl named Gale, who lives in a small village, and you are exploring the forest when suddenly, like, spaceships come to your village as you're out exploring a ruin in the middle of the forest. You come back home and you find out that all the adults in the village have been abducted by these extraterrestrial beings, and so the game is you going out into the world trying to figure out where these aliens came from. Why did they come to your village? Why are they kidnapping people? Why did they kidnap the adults in your village? And how to get your villagers back from these aliens. And you're going through all these different areas. You're going through desert areas, forest areas, a bunch of like medieval style things, because this game is very much a fantasy, still all, like, besides the alien stuff, this is still a fantasy style game. So you're having like your usual fantasy style creatures and stuff like that, along with the extraterrestrial sci-fi kind of thing, which I think is what makes this game unique. Is the fact that it's like fantasy sci-fi kind of mix of that. The world that Gale lives in is like a fantasy world, but then you got the sci-fi aspect with the aliens that have come to start abducting your villagers. And it is very much a very fun game. Definitely um worth checking out. And just like Crosscode, I haven't fully finished it yet, but I am like in the middle of finishing it right now. So who knows, it might end up replacing one of these games in the top 10 list, but still, just from what I've played of it, it is still a very fun game, and it is definitely worth checking out, especially as someone like me who was a huge fan of the original Flash game on Newgrounds. So Phenotopia Awakening, definitely worth, at the very least, an honorable mention. Alright, we made it to number 1. The number 1 game that I feel is the most underrated is Genosha. So Genosha is a like a sci-fi detective investigation kind of thing. It's a visual novel, and like the most basic I can break it down is that it is basically single player Among Us or single player Werewolf. You know, if you've ever played Among Us, or if you've ever played, you know, the Werewolf game, Mafia game, whatever, Genosha is very much like similar like that, just single player and in a visual novel format. So the story of Genosha is that you wake up on this spaceship that just recently left a planet, and the entire game is you trying to figure out which one of the many crewmates that are aboard the ship is an imposter known as a Genosha, which a Genosha is like an organism or something. I don't really like the story for Genosha is kind of complicated, and you really got to pay attention to it. So I didn't completely understand a lot of it. But from what I basically could understand is that the Genosha is like this kind of like organism-like form that can possess somebody or like take over their body or something like that, and they can take on the exact same memories, exact same mannerisms, everything about the original host. Like they are downright damn near almost impossible to figure out if they are human or not. And the whole point of the game is that you're trying to figure out who on the ship is a Genosha, and there could be multiple. There's not just one, just like Among Us. There could be multiple. I believe there's like 13 or 14 characters in total, and the game does like have like a randomized like kind of thing where you can choose how many Genosha there will be. You know, like there's like a system that like you can choose to like randomize rolls or choose how many Genosha there are. Like it's a very complex thing later on, but the main general gist is that you're trying to figure out who is a Genosha and stop them from killing the Genosha crewmates by putting the Genosha in the freezer. There's also a very complicated like time travel kind of thing as well, where the entire game is like you and everybody on the ship, on the crew on the ship is stuck in a time loop, and every loop is a completely different order of events. Like one character that was Genosha in one loop may just be an innocent person in another loop. Even you, the player, can end up being a Genosha yourself, one loop, or you can end up being a regular human in another loop. It's a very very interesting and unique type of game, type of visual novel, and it does admittedly take quite some time to get used to. It does take some time to really get the story rolling, because like on average it takes like between like I think 130 to 150 loops or 170 to beat the game, because this is a game that really takes its time with the story, because like I said, it's a time loop, and again, it's a visual novel, so it's already going to be very long, because there's all kinds of different routes, different events that you have to watch and view to progress the main story, to figure out why you're stuck in a time loop, how to stop the Genosha from basically happening on the ship, and trying to get out alive and trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So it's a very slow type of game that takes quite a while to really get it like the main meat of the game, but it is still definitely worth checking out, and I definitely think it is probably the most underrated game that I have played, because I've barely ever see anybody ever mention or talk about this game at all. And there is also an anime adaptation coming out, I believe this year or next year, which I'm very excited to see how they do with that, because I'm very interested in see how they will translate the game into anime format. So I'm very excited for that. But for Genosha, definitely the most underrated game I have ever played, and definitely deserves to be checked out by many more people. Alright everybody, that is it. That is my top 10 underrated games. Admittedly, this video went on for a lot longer than I did. I ended up yapping for too long for a lot of these games that I didn't mean to, so I apologize for that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I hope that you guys will check out some of these games that I mentioned. And I will see you guys next time in the next video. This is TitansBane signing out. Take care and goodbye.